So, tell me about being in Europe with Frank Butler before you bought the Lancia and what it was like.
I was a tech rep working in Europe, and as you know, in those days, it was America was in a good position, and I was making a good salary and enjoying the benefits of being in Europe and in France. So, one of the things I needed was some transportation. So I went and looked around to buy an automobile, and I happened to be in Paris, which I visited, often because it wasn't that far away. And I saw a number of cars, and I really didn't know much about them, but I saw a Lancia, and it looked like a nice-looking car, and I decided that I would buy that.
And what did Frank buy at the same time?
I don't think Frank bought anything at the same time.
Yes, he bought the Ferrari.
Not at the same time.
Tell me what Frank Butler was. Tell his whole name. Say Frank Butler's full name. He was a buddy of yours. What he was doing with you in Europe. 2 sentences.
Frank Butler was a tech rep, just like I was, a technical representative working for a private company on contract to the Army. And, he was doing technical things, and I was doing technical things with the Army. And that's the end of it right there.
Okay, so you were there with Frank Butler in Europe, in Verdun,
Right.
first, and then from, 1953 to 50, what?
You're asking an 81-year-old person specific dates way back then? I don't think so, yeah.
Yeah, approximately. What years were you in Europe with Frank?
It was in the 50s.
I came in August 15, 1958, and he had already been there 3.5 years.
Okay. We're gonna do this stuff first. Okay, so you were working as a tech rep. You decided to get a car, and you went to Joseph Cataneo's garage in St. Cloud to get the Ferrari. I mean, did you get the Lancia with Frank when he got a Ferrari, or is that not true?
I don't remember
That's what Frank said.
what Frank was doing. Okay.
You guys got the cars at the same time from the same garage.
Well, that could be, but he did his own, deals and whatnot, and I did my own deals, so I really wasn't paying attention to what he was doing.
All right. Well, just tell me about going to the garage to purchase the Lancia.
Well, I went there and I saw a number of different cars, and I told you I didn't know much about cars, especially sports cars. And this looked like a nice-looking car, and I could afford to buy it. So I looked at that, and that's why I got it.
Well, that garage was a very famous garage. It was the North American Racing Team garage for Ferrari at the time when you bought that car.
Oh,
And Frank Butler and you took some pictures around the garage of some Ferraris and other special cars.
right.
Those turned out to be quite significant in our story because one of the pictures is the Roberto Rossellini Ingrid Bergman car that you took a picture of, and John Shirley has restored his car to that color based on that picture that you guys took in the garage.
Wow, okay.
Very significant to be there at that time. So what do you remember about going to the garage at that time? Were there a lot of mechanics? Were there a lot of used cars? Was it a small place, big place? Remember much about being there?
Just that there were a number of cars there, that's it. And you look at one, you look at another, and you don't know much about, which one is which or whatever. You just pick one out, and that's the end of that.
What were you told about the Lancia specifically? It was used.
Well, I wasn't told.
Weren't you told by that it was owned by a race car driver,
Well,
De Silva Ramos?
I found out when I got the documentation who was involved in the car originally. And that was De Silva Ramos. And that he had bought it for his wife, and then she, I guess, either drove it a little bit, and that was the end of that, because it had very low mileage on it when I got it.
She was afraid for him because he'd had an accident. And so I guess it looked like a race car. So she probably didn't want them to have it anymore.
So you bought the car.
That's right.
Then where did you go in it? You and Frank went a few places, and then you and Frank went with the Ferrari and you went to races, you went on some trips and films.
Well, most or a lot of the guys, the Army people that were in Verdun, took advantage of the fact that cars were reasonably priced and that they could, own them. And they had, they had Porsches and they had MGs and they had, various cars, some antique cars actually, Peugeots and things like that. So this was just an opportunity to join the group. Everybody needed transportation, and that was it.
You and Frank were aficionados.
They needed transportation and they bought them. But
I'm talking about you and Frank going to the races.
yeah, we did go to a number of races, yeah. I don't remember how many.
Well, you went to Le Mans in '58, I think, and you went
Yes.
to one of the Grand Prix in '59 and the Nürburgring in '59, according to Frank's notes.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting.
He wants you to repeat that.
You went to Le Mans in '58.
Spa.
Spa, and the Nürburgring in '59, and I think one of the Grand Prix in '59.
Not 59, it was 58, because we were married in 59. He didn't go to Nürburgring in 59, it was earlier.
Yeah. We went to a number of races in France and in Germany, the Nürburgring and the Le Mans in France, and we got a chance to see some of the famous drivers whom I admired and was able to meet in person later at Pebble Beach.
Give me that again, but say that you saw Sterling Moss racing against Fangio. You told the story of Moss. You said you were better than Fangio. Remember that?
Well, you try and compliment people when you meet them, but
But you meant it. He's your hero. That's what he wants you to say.
Okay. Sterling Moss was a driver that I admired very much. He was very talented, and I saw him at several races, one at the Nürburgring that I remember, and I had often wished I could shake his hand. I wasn't able to shake it until many years later when I met him at Pebble Beach, and that was a big thrill.
Okay. You also talked about taking the car, the Lancia, on the Nürburgring, driving it, and
Tell that story.
Well, like every young foolish person.
put your hands on the wheel.
Put your hands on the wheel when you tell it.
Jeez. Like every foolish young person with a convertible and sports car, the tendency is to do foolish things. One of them was taking a drive on the Nürburgring, which they let you to do, and I almost wrecked the car.
Why? What did you do?
Well, I did the wrong thing when the right thing should have been done.
Can you explain?
Spun out?
There are, I don't know, in those days, of course, the Nürburgring is different now than it was before. And now there's, it's much shorter, and I think it's much easier. But before it was like 193 different curves, S-curves, and all that. And I went downhill. I was going too fast. I went through an S-curve, and the car was sliding. Fortunately, the car is somewhat forgiving, and the maneuvers, in my panic, I must have made the right maneuvers because I survived, but I became very close to wrecking the car.
Wow. Tell me about the Lancia itself. It's way ahead of its time, engineering.
Well, it has some engineering design elements that are very, they were very progressive in those days, and they were new, and which made the balance of the car as far as roadability goes very good. And as you know, if it's a 50-50 balance, it works very well. So, well, I appreciated that the car, would tolerate some misuse. Let's put it that way.
What about the brakes? What kind of brakes were they?
Say again?
Let me. Inboard brakes.
Oh, you mean the mechanical features of the car? Yeah, it has essentially two units under the chassis. One is the engine, and the other one is a unit that contains all the rest of the car, and that's the rear end and the clutch and the transmission and inboard brakes, and to keep everything all, to enable low unsprung weight. That's what it's designed to do, and it does that.
It also has one of the first production V6 engines made. Tell me that.
Yeah, it had the engine design was a V6, and that was unusual in those days. Yeah.
Okay.
You had Michelin tires.
So you were a tech rep. You're in Europe. You're there with Frank Butler. You got the Lancia. He buys the Ferrari. What do you remember about Frank buying the Ferrari? And you're not going to hear my question. So Frank bought a 1953 212 Inter and a road car that was pretty strong. And he used to drive it around. You guys used to drive around this and that. Tell me that little story.
Well, Frank bought a Ferrari. I knew very little about Ferrari, and it was impossible for me to race him because he had a much more powerful automobile. And the only thing I really remember is the flames that were coming out of his exhaust.
What did he call it? The belch fire. Yes.
I guess.
Yes, he did.
Well, what we learned about that Ferrari is that it was a road car.
It was a racing car.
It was a race car, but for the road. It wasn't a race car for the track. It was a race car for the road. They call it a road car.
Or it could have been for the track because it had no amenities other than a powerful engine and big brakes and a chassis and a gear shift, and that was it.
And you remember it as what color?
Oh, it was red when I remember it.
Okay.
Ferrari red, yeah.
Ferrari red. Well, he painted the car red. Frank did.
He had it painted. He didn't paint it himself.
It was blue. And it's now back to blue, I guess, which was the original color. But on the website, the Ferrari website, he wrote that he had it painted really around the same time that I guess you took the car in to get painted, which was kind of fascinating to me. And that car went on then to go to Pebble Beach, be invited to Pebble Beach in 1993, and then won the first 100-point perfect restoration car. Quite an honor. This car you then brought back to the States in 1962?
Yeah, I think it was 62, right.
And then, so tell me that. You took it back to the States in 62, you drove it around New York for a little while, put it in the garage, and the last time it was driven was 1965. Tell me that little story.
Well, basically, when you have starting a family and you have more than a few members, there's only two people that can sit in the car, or maybe a small person in the middle here. And after that, it is kind of a useless automobile. Plus the fact that nobody knew enough about how to service it, and if you had a car like a Citroën, which was also unserviceable, for all practical purposes, you were stuck because you either had to do it yourself or send it back to France or Italy to get it serviced, which is kind of crazy. In any case, it was a very difficult situation with respect to the car. It was a nice car, but not too practical. So you put it in the garage and you leave it there for 45 years.
What did you do to keep it?
Well, I understood at that point about engines and automobiles and that kind of thing. And of course I learned from Frank and then from other people that were doing servicing their cars. And one of the things I had remembered was a car engine needs lubrication in order to work properly. So you take a lot of oil and you try and preserve it and fill it up with oil. And if you decide to change or to resurrect it at a later date, which might be many, many years down the line, you have to do special things to make sure that the oil pressure comes up to spec before you can actually activate the engine. And of course, the leather seats, you have to put a lot of saddle soap, and you have to do that religiously, or else they're not going to survive. And it's about the size of it. Yeah.
That's right. So I just want to hear you say that you stored the car for 45 years in sort of the bear goes into the
Hibernation.
in a hibernative state. In just a couple of sentences. I don't want a long thing, but you knew you were preserving it. Now I hear you say that. I need to hear you say the word preserving it. You're preserving it. You knew you were going to resurrect it later, and you stored it in this
State of hibernation.
state of hibernation or something like that. Just a few words. That's all I need. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, fortunately, when I was living in New York, I had space in the garage to accommodate a car, 2 cars actually, and this was a car that I wasn't going to use on a daily basis, and it needed to be stored away and or preserved. So when I put it in the garage, I did all the things necessary, and the oil and the saddle soap and all of that, to enable it to survive those years. I didn't know how that was going to turn out, but I did my best to try and preserve it for those years. And 45 years later, I had the opportunity to resurrect it to some degree. And then we got some professional help to do something once the car arrived in California, which that was the end of the tale.
Well, say you shipped it in 2001, September 11th, 2001, to California. Tell me that.
I shipped it to California in 2001.
September 11th, as it turned out.
Yeah, it went during that time.
September 11th, yeah, it was.
So say that again, please.
I shipped it on September 11th, 2001 to California, and that's where it is at the present time.
Okay. And what's it like to see it driving and moving today?
It's a great thrill.
It reminds me of the joy that I had in driving it in Europe when it was pristine, essentially. And that was a lot of fun, and Jay Leno reminds me because he has a similar automobile, and he demonstrates that on Jay Leno's garage. And if you want to know the details about Lancias, and more than I can tell you at this moment, you look at his website.
Okay. And what was it like to meet Sterling Moss in 2008 at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance?
Well, when we were we were in Pebble Beach, we happened to see Sterling Moss, who was wandering around doing his official duties there, and we were able to meet him and greet him and congratulate him on his wonderful career, which I'm sure he knew about to begin with. But he was very gracious, and we took a picture together, and I cherished that. And it was
a big thrill.
One of the nice people that, and a very talented, driver and person. So I enjoyed that.
That's great. Just gonna put your hair down. It's blowing up here in the back. Okay. Good. All right. Now I think we're gonna switch for Mom. We got most of your. When did you come to Europe, and what were you doing in Europe?
I came to Europe August in 1958 as an entertainment director for Army Special Services. Special Services was a multifaceted program that had libraries, craft shops, photo labs, service clubs, and little theaters. And the mission was to provide our GIs with social, cultural, educational, moral benefits of modern recreation, and to give them something to do in their off-duty time. And the further mission was to help them maybe gather an appreciation for these things and carry that over into their civilian life. I did variety shows, plays, talent contests, traveling shows, even summer stock. And I played in a variety of venues, from French opera houses to the post theaters, special service clubs, even in gymnasiums. And I performed all over our posts that we had in France at that time. And but I was lucky to have a dream job, to work with enthusiastic individuals and perform for an audience that was hungry for entertainment. And not only that, I was lucky enough to meet the man in my life that's been with me for 50 years. How good is that? That's, what else do you want to know?
Well, what was you were one of the only female
There were
directors?
8 entertainment directors in France. I was the only female. There were 3 or 4 others in Germany at the time. We had entertainment directors in Germany and Italy and France. There were 8 in France. And I was stationed in Verdun. We had them in Orléans and La Rochelle and all around various posts in France. The big army headquarter bases in France. The purpose of the army in France was to support the 7th Army in Germany, which was there as a bulwark against possible invasion by Russia at the time. Really, it was after the Cold War. It was during the Cold War. We were there while the Berlin Wall went up.
And then tell me about performing, directing some of the plays. Name a couple of them, and who you met and where you went.
It was a wonderful time. I did the plays The Thing, which we toured all over France. And the young GI who designed my costumes for that show, later went on to work for Oleg Cassini and designed Jackie Kennedy's clothes. We had the same designer, no less. We did summer stock. I had leads in Great Sebastians, and I was in Solid Gold Cadillac, Thieves Carnival. I worked as tech director for many, many of the shows, made costumes for most of them. We even built a theater in the gymnasium in Verdun. I made stage curtains for this theater, built a platform, and we performed 4 shows in 5 weeks in summer stock there.
Give me the 3 shows that we talked about in the order quickly. Not a lot of information.
In those shows for the summer stock, we did Great Sebastian, Solid Gold Cadillac, Thieves Carnival, and Romanoff and Juliet. I played Mrs. Romanoff, and my husband, who is of Russian extraction, says my Russian accent was terrible. And we had a lot of fun. Peter Ustinov wrote that show. Al actually met him in France, in Cannes, one summer. And we have some 35 millimeter movies of him somewhere. He was a sports car fan, and he wrote this hysterical record called the Grand Prix on the Rock of Gibraltar, and he parodies all the racing car people who were racing car drivers at the time, like Sterling Moss, Phil Hill, Fangio, and in his record he calls them Ross, Fandango, and not Hill, something, Dill. It's hysterical. He makes all the noises about the cars, and you'd swear you were hearing an actual race car driver, and it isn't. It's Ustinov making these noises. It's wonderful. He was as big a fan of the Grand Prix as Al was, and Frank. I went to Le Mans with them. It was a fantastic experience. That's a 24-hour Grand Prix.
When did you first see the Lancia?
Aha.
When did you first meet Alex?
That's his story. He came to the little theater in a Quonset hut that I had built with help, and he wanted to borrow some lights and paint because one of the fellows in their BOQ was returning home, and so they were going to decorate this airport hangar, Verdun airport hangar, and then he asked me if I'd like to go to the party, and I took one look at his little car, and I said, yes, I think so. And the rest is history.
And you got to drive the car once to pick up someone.
Oh well, I didn't get to drive the car for a year after we were married. Once I got to drive the car, I knew the marriage was going to last for over 51 years today. Anyway, I had to take this bird colonel around to introduce. He was the advance officer for Rolling Along, which is the Army show that culminated in a talent show at post level on up until you had the cream of the crop, and you put together a talent show that toured all around, all the posts that the Army had all around the world. That's what it's called, Rolling Along, which comes from the Army song, if you know it. Anyway, this bird colonel was coming, and he was the advance officer for the show, and I had to take him out to meet all the COs at the various posts where I was in charge, where was my reign of duty. And I picked him up in Nancy, and I went out on the highway, and it was black ice. I didn't realize it. He wasn't thrilled about being with a female in the first place, nor in a race car, a sports car in the second place. And then when we went out, I spun out, and he was screaming at me, "Don't step on the brakes! Don't step on the brakes!" Where Alex had trained me very well. I didn't do that. I knew enough not to do it. And I just waited. We did a complete 360, and then the adrenaline kicked in, and then I started to shake because I had managed to not wreck the sports car or us.
Okay.
I didn't do that very well.
All right. So you got married in '59.
We were married in '59, first by the mayor of Verdun in a civil ceremony, and the next day in a religious ceremony at the Maginot Caserne Post Chapel.
Oh.
And of course, the Maginot Line is what Verdun is famous for. So this post where we were married was called the Maginot Caserne. My maid of honor was the director of the local service club, and Frank Butler was our best man. Frank had traveled all over with us. We had gone to Cannes with us and to Berlin with us. I actually thought maybe he might go with us on our honeymoon, but he did not.
So you call the launch, tell me what you call the launch.
Oh, She is so pretty. Her name, I mean, is Lancia Aurelia, which means gold. So I called her Goldie. She has wrinkles, and so do I now.
Say that again, but don't say that.
Okay. Well, it's the Lancia Aurelia, and Aurelia means gold.
I think it means golden.
Golden.
So say this, start again.
Okay. She's the Lancia Aurelia, and Aurelia means golden, and so I called her Goldie. What else?
Great.
I think it's appropriate that she's now in the Golden State.
So you were directing plays in Europe, got married, had a son. Tell me about you had your first son over there.
Yes, we got married, and 2 years later, after I had directed a group that took off and toured all over, I gave birth to our son Paul, and he got to ride in this car on a little cushion right here. And he had a little white car coat that a French girl gave to him, my French secretary. She said any baby that rode in this car should have a car coat. Oh, he said his first words in this car. We were on our way to Spain, and there was a fly caught in the compartment here, and I kept brushing it away and saying, naughty fly, naughty fly. And all of a sudden, he said, naughty fly, just as plain as could be. I thought I was going to drive off the road.
Okay. So, Dad, you took the car in to get it serviced at in Turin, the number of times?
Yeah, it was tough to get anything done in France in those days, especially for an Italian car. So we had to take it down to Italy.
How long would it take?
Well, normally you would take it down there, after you've gone so many miles, so they could service it, maybe change the brakes and that kind of thing. And I guess one of the last times was when we had it redone.
What was the factory like? Was it very personal? Were you able to go in the factory and see the cars being?
No, it was difficult to get to where the work was being done because in those days they had a lot of communist workers, and you had to be very careful about how you addressed them or what your actions were and the whole thing. And I was warned by the executives there that you should not upset the people because they do nasty things when you do that. So yeah, that's the way it was.
Your car is handmade. You don't want to upset anybody who's doing the making.
Yeah, I mean, it's an individually put together automobile. It's not they made a number of them, but they were all individually created.
You have one great expression you use about the wiring. What do you call the wiring? You remember? It's caveman.
Well, I don't think we want to go into that.
Well, he'd like it in there because that's okay.
It's okay to have one negative, thing to say. You just.
Well, yeah.
I don't think you thought that at the time.
Well, it doesn't matter what it actually is. If it operates properly and you can use it, then you're reasonably happy with it. But if you have to, go into and repair it yourself without having the expertise and whatnot, you'd like it to be designed a little differently. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about going to the Vatican in 19-something. Do you remember that?
Well,
Oh, that was fantastic. We were in St. Peter's Basilica, and Pope John the 23rd came in, and they carried him in his chair like they do, and they started. This big cheer went up, I was not prepared for that. I didn't expect it. In a church, you're quiet. You don't make it. At least when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, that's what you did. You didn't make noise in church. And here these people were roaring and clapping and cheering as he came in. And he went right down the aisle right next to us. It was great.
Well, some of the things we found under the seat were very interesting, very archaeological. Gum wrappers and coins, prayers from the Vatican, gas rationing coupons from 1960. Tell me about those things.
Well, I was rather surprised when you pulled all these mementos of our past life, unearthed them like a dig. They're gum wrappers and from a car, gas ration card, a prayer book card and pieces of a folder from a trip we took, various things. It was very interesting. They were relics from our past. Is that good enough?
That's right. Just tell me what it's like to have visited Pebble Beach and to meet some of the people who are exploring the Lancia for the very first time in 45 years.
We found the whole adventure of Pebble Beach to be fascinating. The variety of cars and their shapes and past histories and everything, it was just very, very interesting. And just the variety of people that are there is fascinating in itself. From Jay Leno to Ed Herman to Sterling Moss, Phil Hill, these.
The Kino brothers.
Oh, the Kino and the Kino brothers. Excuse me. Let me start that again. The variety of people that we met at Pebble Beach was astounding. From Sterling Moss to Jay Leno to Edward Herman, the Kino brothers of the Antique Roadshow. It was just fascinating, and the variety and everything it's a wonderful experience.
What was it like to have Lee Kino be one of the judges of the post-war preservation class, and then to call you and say what?
We were. It was a great pleasure to meet Lee Kino, and when he was judging the car, because I'm a big fan of his from watching the Antiques Roadshow. The twins have great personalities and wonderful, wonderful background. I had not known that they were experts in cars as well, and so that was a surprise. But perhaps the biggest surprise was when he called us at home after the event to express his regret that our car didn't get an award, because he said it was the epitome of preservation. He couldn't understand how Al had the presence of mind to pickle the engine and do all the things that he did to it and preserve it and keep it for us for now. And he was thrilled to see it. And he was more upset about the lack of appreciation on the part of the panel or whatever than we were.
Okay. Great. I think we got it all.
Right into the sun, boy, that's terrific. Yeah.
He's in the shade there from the tree. It's okay. You look interested, honey? He does.
Right.
Put your hands on the wheel there, please.
It's 3 and 9.
Let's see. Okay.
Okay, pretend like you're starting it. Just put your hand on the
On the,
key there.
you would have your hand on the wheel at the same time.
Like that, right.
Good.
You can make noises like we used to know.
Right. You want a picture of my ear, is it? Oh, let's see.
It's better from back there.
Did Jay Leno say to you guys when you met him?
Is
I
that-
told him that my husband had bought our 1957 Lancia in Paris, and I knew that he had one like it. But I said I knew that Al bought the car in Paris in 1957. And the first thing he said to me was, "Is it still under warranty?"
And we had to think a minute.
Well, now, when you talked to him, he told you he wanted what for his car?
Wheels.
Alex, what did he
What?
want? He wanted wheels?
He didn't talk to me, he talked to Gregory.
Yeah, he wanted to buy the wheels from the parts car.
Well, fortunately, we have 10 wheels.
Yeah. What he meant was the spoked.
No, he didn't. That's just it. No, he didn't want the spoked ones.
Well, that's what he ended up, I guess, getting or something. Cause,
No, that's originally when he got the car after
That's
it
what
had
he
been,
had. He wanted
it
the
had
other
spoke wheels. He changed them to what these are here.
So we did have wheels we could have sold him.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
well, you remember the guy from Colombia or something that had the Lancia?
Yeah.
Costa Rica.
I'm sorry, Costa Rica. Yeah, it was like Carlos or something.
Yes.
Or,
I wrote his name down. I can't tell you now.
yeah, but phenomenal guy. He remembered your whole story and told the story.
Better than we did.
Well, yeah. But,
Well, then why don't you photograph him?
he used it, but he actually sold the wheels to him.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Okay.
So what's he doing for wheels for his car?
He has extra wheels. He
Oh.
restores cars.
That's right.
Put your hands on the wheel there again, please.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
This wheel actually moves, Greg. And when I was pregnant, I pushed it way down so there would be room for my belly. Well, I guess not.
Can I go home now?
Oh, God. I can't watch while you're walking on that.
All right, Dad, give her a hug.
Put your arm around me.
You can't get too romantic in this car, I'll tell you that. All right.
Wait, one more time.
It's painful, I know, dear.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, do it again. There we go.
Right.
Okay, just lean in. Just lean your heads together.
Oh,
Good,
boy.
look at me. Look at me.
Oh, boy.
Don't do that. You goofball.
Okay. Can I go home now?
Talk about a reluctant actor.
Your moment, man.
You met Sterling Moss with such great joy. You should have expounded on that here because you were thrilled with it, Al.
How close were you to Frank? Tell me just a little bit about Frank Butler.
You mean,
Frank was your good buddy.
Yeah.
Frank was a very, very intelligent fellow. He was a technical guy, which I appreciated because we could talk to each other in technical language and understand each other, which most people in those days didn't have a clue. And he was a loyal, generous person, and we spent a lot of good times together going various places all over Europe.
Would you say that he encouraged your interest in sports cars?
Oh, he certainly contributed to my knowledge and my enthusiasm for races and cars and things like that. Yes, absolutely.
What's your fondest memory of being with Frank?
Well, I'd rather not go into that, but other than that, we were good friends and we went to various places in Europe and had a good time.
You also have some other buddies. Who were some of the other buddies that were in Europe with you?
Well, it was Charlie's Bar, and then, we used to get have a good time there, and that was in the Army supplied housing which is called
The BOQ.
the Bachelor Officers' Quarters. And that was a very comfortable way to live. Most things were, taken care of, and you could get nice meals and meet professional people, and it was very nice.
Who was there with you? You had Jack Brebbia, there was
Jim
some
Stapleton.
of the 6.
Well, we had all the professions. We had the people who were educated in various talents.
Jack Brebbia and Jim Stapleton were lawyers.
Uh,
Who was your pilot buddy?
Well, Ken Fritz was a very talented aviator, Army aviator, and
You went everywhere
he
with him.
flew various places, and I occasionally got to go with him. Jack Brebbia and Jim Stapleton were lawyers, and I was able to get some good legal advice from them when I needed it. And there were a lot of other very sociable people in various, Army.
Jerry Emmett was a doctor.
Well, Jerry Emmett was a psychiatrist who gave me some insights on, why people continually gambled. And it was a very pleasant experience to meet these people and socialize with them. And
What was the mood like in Europe at the time?
well, Europe was just recovering essentially from the battlefields and all the mist and deceased people and all the violence that was there. So they didn't have a lot of resources. America was on the top of the heap, and a dollar went a long way. So it was very advantageous to be there at that time and have a decent salary, which I was lucky enough to have.
Do you remember gas rationing?
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, well that was another thing that we were privileged to be able to buy, even though it was rationed to some degree. Gas, while most other Europeans were restricted in big ways.
We were lucky. We had our retirement first when they were young enough to enjoy it.
And you were in Verdun first, and then tell me you moved to Chateau.
Brienne-le-Château.
Yeah, Verdun was the main place where we spent a lot of time, and there was another base that was ready to be occupied if necessary, and we went down there. It was Brienne-le-Château, which was probably, 50 miles or 80 miles from where we were in Verdun.
It was a SAC base that they reopened, and it had to be refurbished.
Yeah,
There
they
wasn't
had a-
anything to start with. We
Right.
had to help with that. And we moved there, and I had a small child. I remember this, and there wasn't a PX or anything else there at the time. It was all just bare bones base when we moved there.
Yeah, there were a lot of exciting times, like meeting Mrs. Erickson. Yeah.
You don't need to talk about that.
Well, you want to get people's attention, and there are a lot of stories that you could tell.
No.
Okay.
Okay, can I go?
I had a baby when I went there. It wasn't. I didn't have a small child till later, till I came back to the States.